Hey, I've been thinking about this video for a while and I keep meaning to do it, and I'm going to do it today. Today's the day. Basically, I want to go over some the precursor to doing the live coding challenge in Phase 4. So in my review sessions, I go through this review session notes, which I can share in the comments here. But basically, what I discovered is that when the first time I did the review session, this made a lot of sense because everybody was new. But since then, it's like some people are new, some people aren't new. And so I've been meaning to just make a video of like, what does it look like when I'm starting the challenge? So I think what I'll do here is I'll pause this recording and then get a challenge ready, which was the one that we did yesterday. And that way, well, I don't know, at some point in the future, people will cycle through it and see it, but whatever, it is what it is. But anyways, it'd be nice to have a challenge to kind of present and pretend like I'm giving to a student you. Okay, so let me get myself ready and then we'll jump into it. Okay, I'm ready. Let me share my screen, share everything here. So I put something into the routes because based on the description of this, that's where I would have the person paste it. But now I'm going to pretend like I'm talking to another student. Okay, I put this challenge into the chat and I want you to copy and paste it somewhere in your code where it makes sense. Hint, hint. I already put it somewhere it makes sense. Because it says create a custom route, so we'll put it in the routes file. I already did the commenting it out, word wrap, all that. So I want to run through a few things before we get started with the live coding challenge. So the first one is, obviously, you're going to read the challenge, and that should lead you into the clarification phase. Just to be clear, the clarification phase for me lasts throughout the whole challenge. So obviously, when you first read it, if you have questions, ask your questions. But if you run into things later, because as you're reading it, you don't pick up some nuance that you see later, then it's fine to ask the question later. There's a level at which you're practicing communicating your understanding of the deliverable with the person who gave you the challenge. And again, there's all of this is in service of preparing you for technical interviews. So I think that's a thing worth practicing. And one concept that you may want to consider is the difference between a clarifying question versus a clarifying statement. So a clarifying question says, I'm not sure what this means, or can you confirm that this means what I think it does? A clarifying statement is more along the lines of the second one, where you're kind of asserting something and you're asking the person to listen to what you're saying and confirm that that's a good understanding. So for instance, I've already called up in the invoices index to have all the invoices here, because the first part says, I want to get all the invoices that have a cost greater than a specific number. So I might look at this and say, okay, so for instance, if I said the number 4,000 for the cost, I would expect to get this invoice, but not at this one, not this one, not this one, etc. But then continuing on and reading this challenge, I'm not actually sending back the invoice. I'm going to send back the user, which means the user object, user number 9 from the user table. And again, that's me making a clarifying statement to say, I understand this challenge and I'm kind of showing you that I understand what I'm doing. The value from more of an interview or an employment perspective is that you don't get deliverables and then run off and start working on it before you practice confirming, like, this is exactly what the person wants you to accomplish. Okay, so clarification phase, clarification questions, clarification statements. So then the second part is, am I going to write pseudocode, or am I going to just start writing my code? If you have not written any pseudocode in your time here at Flatiron, you probably want to think about, like, how do I write pseudocode? How does that work? It's there's not one right way to do it, but when you're preparing for your live coding and you're going into your capstone and, just continuing to develop your skills, you're looking at a deliverable, think about what are the steps I would need to take in order to accomplish this. A very simple form of pseudocoding can be accomplished by just chopping a paragraph up into individual sentences. This is not by any means the end of the pseudocoding process, but at least it kind of takes me down a certain level of like, do this, do this, do this, do this. You don't have to pseudocode. So for instance, if I know exactly what I want to do with this line, create a custom route that takes a parameter of a number, I don't have to try to break that into smaller steps. I think pseudocoding is most helpful when you're facing something that's challenging. So, yeah, I mean, to me, having done so many of these, all of these feel like, this is one line of code. I can write this. So, if we want to talk more about pseudocoding, you should send me a message and say, let's do more videos on pseudocoding. Because I think it's a really deep topic that gets at some breaking problems apart. So pseudocoding or just jumping into coding. Let's go back to my thing because I forget all of the notes that I said here. You have access to documentation. So if you get into the middle of something and you're like, shoot, I don't remember how to filter in Ruby, you're welcome to type that in. There it is. Filter array is the class. That's a good sign. And then eventually this is going to pull up some documentation. API doc is acceptable documentation. I also listed here Active Record and Ruby docs. There are other sources out there that you can look at. The filter method is actually called select in Ruby, but you can write filter. It'll work. So if I take this line of code and I put it into my Rails console, which is in this terminal, I should, oops, help if I copied it. And by the way, I'm a big fan of copying and pasting working code from documentation and putting it places that I can have access to it. Because going back and forth between screens, remember that when you're doing a live coding, you're typically trying to use one screen. So it's annoying to have to try to remember stuff and bring it over. Just copy and paste it over. Ask the person if that's okay. I don't see why it wouldn't be. Okay, so you have access to documentation. Think about the keyword that you're using when you're doing your documentation search. Is it Ruby? Is it Rails? Is it Active Record? What is the right word for you to be putting on to that? And Googling, of course, is a bit of a art science where you're learning as you get more practice, like what are the right words to put in. Obviously, if you can do a sort of small number of keywords, that's excellent. If you're writing a plain language statement, then you have to do more kind of sorting through stuff, but access documentation is an important point. This is something that's kind of come over time, like understanding more about having an active record approach versus having a Ruby array method approach. So just as an example, if I have, let's see, it's not this particular challenge, but if I, let me look at the schema here because this is a project I haven't thought about in a while. Point contact, email, description. Here we go. This is kind of what I want. Let me look at the invoices. Invoice.all, invoice.all.map. And then we're going to map over each invoice and we're going to look at the service description. Just want to see what I'm working with here. Okay, a whole bunch of Latin. So let's say, I think qua is a Latin word. Let's say I'm looking for the word qua in the service description. So there's an active record way to do it using where and like, and there's a Ruby array way to do it, which is just filtering. You get the array of invoice objects and then filter based on some condition. So the filter one, I think I can write from scratch, invoice.all.select, and then I'm looking at each invoice.service description dot include documentation time. Can't remember string method include Ruby. Looks like it has a question mark. Ooh, Geeks for Geeks. Geeks for Geeks is a little debatable. Oh, Ruby doc. This is a good one. Looks like it's include with a question mark. And then I would say qua. And I'm going to close my thing. And I get some list of invoice objects. I can tell it's a list because I have this array symbol first. That means it's an array of invoice objects. Also can tell I'm not getting every single invoice object because the first one is not ID 1. So that's good. Cool. So that is a Ruby way to do it, which is to say I get an array of objects and then I just do some array methods and string methods, and I kind of come up with a way to figure out the query that I'm looking for, right? An active record way to do it, let me look up where like active record query interface. I'll use the command F where search. Oh my God. 175 of these. This is not good. Not good. Let me just go to where here. Okay, where? 12F like. Oh, like so. Great. It's not helpful. No. This is one of the challenges of documentation. And one of the reasons why you want to spend time playing with documentation, making sure you're clear about, where you're going to find stuff. Okay, fine. So where basically takes in, I mean, if I can do a where, oh, this is SQL. I need to get to active record versions of where. Okay, so if I can take in, a key value pair that is a perfect match, then where is very easy to use. So for instance, if I do invoice.where ID is 1, then I'm going to get the invoice with the ID of 1. The problem with this search is I'm not looking for the service description to only say qua. I'm looking for the service description to include qua. So there's a way to do that where I use like where like. Okay, this is better. Here we go. Boom. So again, I'm going to copy and paste. I'm going to put it somewhere where I can see it. And I'm going to start trying to make my own example here. Where, and then the thing I'm looking at is the service description. And then I'm saying like question mark, and then I'm saying comma qua, because I'm just doing a specific example. And I'm curious whether I need that percent sign to end it or not. Looks like maybe I do. Plus. And I'm wondering whether I need it at the beginning as well as. There we go. And that works. So this symbol, let's see if it says what any occurrences of we treat as wildcards. Okay, so this is the wild card, which means that I can have stuff before it and I can have stuff after it. Probably including nothing before and nothing after. But when I didn't have it before, I was looking for qua as a starting point. Here's a service description that has con at the start. So just for the sake of learning, and now I'm sort of verging out of my original purpose here, but I'm going to take the wildcard off and put capital C-O-N. Yeah. So this just means I'm starting with C-O-N, but whatever comes after it doesn't really matter. So if I want to have stuff potentially on both sides, then I have to have this percent sign on both sides. Okay, what was my point? There's an active record way to do this, and there's a Ruby array way to do it. And there's not a, that doesn't mean one of them is better than the other. I always like to think that the Ruby array method is your sort of backup. Like if I get stuck, I can always just go back to my Ruby skills and say, all right, I have an array of objects. I know how to get that because I can do invoice.all, whatever, customer.all. I don't even know what the models are here. User.all, client.all, whatever. And then I can go from there. The active record methods are great. If you have them in your toolbox, you should definitely work at sharpening that up, but it's not necessary that you're, perfect at that. Oop, I'm running out of time. I got to go to a meeting. Short step validation. Ooh, so important. Check in on your work. So actually what I'm doing in the console, I'm going to put these two together because, I'm running out of time and these do go together. Short step validation. Don't write a bunch of code and you're not even like paying attention to whether it's working or not. So for instance, in the very first part of the challenge is to create a custom route that takes a parameter of a number. I would regard a good first step is to write that route and then go put the action into the controller that I said it would be in, and then try to hit the route and hit the action, put a bybug in the action. Then I can look at the params, see that I hit it, and then I'm off and running. I've completed the first step. I'm on to the next step. Short step validation is so critical to good thinking, good critical thinking, good problem solving, because it allows you to pay attention to what you've accomplished, which I think helps you kind of give yourself a pat on the back and boost forward. And, catch your errors more quickly instead of having a lot of code and then you got to go back and find the needle in the haystack. What went wrong? Being able to use the console like I was doing here, being able to use bybug, not being confused about how to release the bybug. Remember, there's bybug, binding, even debugger, RDBG. So there's a lot of different ways that you can get into the back end in the middle of actions and pause things. I think that's a really important tool to have in your tool belt. Okay. Generally, you got 20 to 30 minutes. You do need to solve the problem in order to succeed. Good luck. All right. That was way longer than my spiel would normally be, but I couldn't help trying to teach in the middle of it. All right. I'm going to put this out there so that you guys can review this and watch this and ask me questions. See ya.